Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're doing something really fun. We are stepping way past those standard static maps in capital cities to unpack one of the most fascinating demographic anomalies on the entire planet. Think of us as geographic detectives today, because we're going to decode the exact environmental and historical forces that dictate why people in Australia and the wider Pacific region live exactly where they do, while leaving vast, massive stretches of land completely untouched. It's like a giant puzzle, and we're going to put the pieces together. Okay, let's dive right into this. We are talking about a region spanning 8.52 million square kilometers. I mean, that is a truly staggering amount of landmass. It's completely dominated by the Australian continent itself, but it also encompasses thousands of islands scattered across the sheer vastness of the Pacific. And when you conceptualize a landmass this colossal, the natural assumption is that it's absolutely packed with people from coast to coast, right? But here is where it gets crazy. Despite that massive expanse, Australia's population density sits at a shockingly low 3.01 persons per square kilometer, just 3.01. It is an absolutely incredible demographic paradox. You have millions upon millions of square kilometers of space, yet the overall density is literally one of the lowest of any country on Earth. We're talking about huge swaths of land that are virtually devoid of human habitation. So it really begs the question. If there is so much space available, why is almost everyone crammed right onto the coast? Because human settlement in this part of the world isn't spread evenly at all. It is intensely concentrated. It packs millions of people tightly into very specific pockets of the region, while completely ignoring the vast majority of the available land. The reality of this distribution is just stark. On one side, you have what's called the Boomerang Coast. That's the southeastern and southwestern coastal strips of Australia. This is the heavily urbanized rim where the vast majority of the population lives, works, and plays. And then on the flip side, you have the Outback, the massive, deeply arid center of the continent. It's an incredible contrast. You have millions of people living shoulder to shoulder on the very edge of the continent, looking inland at a stunningly empty interior. And this isn't just some Australian quirk. It's actually an ironclad role of Oceania's demographics across the board. Across Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, we see the exact same pattern playing out. Populations are incredibly heavily concentrated in coastal capital cities. Major hubs like Suva in Fiji or Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea completely dominate their respective nations' populations. So this entire region, both the continent and the islands, operates under this exact same shared reality. And this brilliantly illustrates our first major clue, Mother Nature. The primary driver of all this coastal crowding is simply climatic determinism. Geography dictates human survival. Globally, temperate zones act as massive magnets for human settlement, and Oceania follows this rule to a T. The milder, far more hospitable climates found along these specific coasts offer manageable temperatures and absolutely crucially reliable rainfall. Humans are a resilient bunch, for sure, but ultimately, we build our societies where the water flows, which leads us to a pretty harsh geographic reality. Australia holds the extreme environmental title of being the driest inhabited continent on Earth. To really put that into perspective, more than 2/3 of the country receives less than 500 millimeters of rain a year. That is incredibly dry. When you're living on a landmass with so little water, you don't really get a choice in where you build your major cities. You are completely at the mercy of the climate, literally forced to settle where the rain actually falls. So why is it so dry and land-fanned? Well, the reason for this severe aridity is heavily tied to what's known as the rain shadow effect. Let's break this down. Along Australia's eastern coast, the Great Dividing Range acts as this towering moisture wall. These mountains physically block the rain-producing weather systems blowing in off the ocean. So the coastal side gets drenched, supporting lush environments and massive populations. But by the time those weather systems cross the peaks, there's virtually no moisture left. It leaves the interior completely starved of the water you'd need for large-scale human settlement. Now, think about this historically. Finding arable land wasn't just a nice economic advantage, it was a strict prerequisite for survival. Long before we had modern grocery stores or global supply chains, establishing any community meant you needed fertile soil and reliable water sources. Finding arable land was, quite literally, a matter of life and death. And that's exactly why areas like the Murray-Darling River Basin became so incredibly foundational. Settlement naturally had to follow the water and the fertile soil simply to sustain life. Now, this exact same geographic logic applies to the Pacific Islands, just on a much smaller microscale. Many of these small volcanic islands feature incredibly rugged, mountainous, and densely forested interiors. They are notoriously difficult to even walk through, let alone cultivate for large-scale agriculture. Meanwhile, the outer coasts offer flat land and vital access to the ocean, and that ocean acts as the primary highway for transport and a critical source of food, which systematically pushes almost everyone out of the rugged center and right onto the coastal edges. Let's move on and see how this builds, because geography is really only half the equation here. While humans definitely follow the water out of strict biological necessity, they follow commerce out of sheer ambition. Economics and history play a role that is just as powerful as mountains and rain clouds when it comes to shaping exactly where populations cluster and grow. This commercial ambition basically manifests in three distinct ways: deep-water coastal trade ports, natural resource mining hubs, and the legacy of historical colonial outposts. These three drivers tightly intertwine to explain exactly how these specific coastal and inland pockets transformed from tiny, isolated camps into the booming economic centers we see today. You see, Oceania is largely defined by what's often called the tyranny of distance. The region is profoundly isolated from the world's other major population and economic hubs over in North America, Europe, and Asia. And because of this extreme global isolation, clinging to the coast was an absolute economic necessity. Deep water ports weren't just convenient to have, they were the sole lifelines connecting these growing regional economies to international shipping and global trade. However, human motivation can occasionally override even the most hostile environments. People will endure the harshest, driest, most brutally isolated conditions you can imagine if there is significant money to be made. That's exactly how you get these crazy inland anomalies like the towns of Alice Springs or Kalgoorlie. Kalgoorlie is located in a spectacularly barren stretch of the outback, but, and here's the kicker, it sits on one of the richest gold deposits on Earth. When there are billions of dollars of minerals buried in the dirt, humans will happily build a booming town in the absolute middle of nowhere. Finally, we have to factor in the compounding weight of history. The major coastal hubs we know today, places like Sydney and Melbourne, were originally founded as British penal colonies or just simple trading outposts. They were positioned entirely for the convenience of maritime access for the British Empire. But over the centuries, that initial colonial footprint snowballed. Once a deep water port is established, massive infrastructure grows around it, which inherently draws in more people, more investment, generation after generation. Now, what's really interesting about all of this is how we pivot from the past to the present. This historical clustering, packing millions of people tightly onto narrow coastal strips while leaving the vast interior nearly empty, has created some massive, massive modern headaches. The geographic and historical forces that built Oceania's population map have directly led to some of the most complex demographic challenges the region is wrestling with right now. The most immediate friction point is the stark, glaring divide between the major cities and what is locally known as the bush. On the coastal urban rim, residents enjoy world-class connectivity, advanced healthcare, you name it, robust infrastructure. But for those scattered inland across the rural bush, that tyranny of distance is a daily reality. The sheer cost and logistical nightmare of running power lines, internet cables, or medical services across a continent of dirt to a tiny, highly dispersed population creates a really severe contrast in living standards. And for the island nations of Oceania, this heavy coastal dependency presents a literal existential threat. Because geography historically forced these populations to settle directly on the shorelines and on low-lying atolls, they are now uniquely vulnerable to a changing climate. Rising sea levels aren't some future theoretical concept here. They are a daily, encroaching reality. Saltwater intrusion is actively ruining the very arable land they depend on to survive, and rising tides are literally forcing entire communities to abandon their ancestral homes to seek higher ground. So the geographic puzzle of Oceania is essentially shifting in real time. As sea levels continue to rise, where exactly will these island populations go? They can't simply migrate into their island's rugged, unfarmable volcanic interiors, and the vast Australian outback remains just as arid and inhospitable as it has always been. Solving this next chapter of displacement is without a doubt going to be the greatest challenge the region has ever faced.